3 days. That's how long I carried the sealed envelope before my son's 5th birthday. I kept it in my jacket, against my chest, while I blew up the balloons, while my wife hung the banner and laughed with her friends. "He has your eyes, you know," she told them, squeezing my arm for the photo. I smiled. I handed out the juice boxes. I cut the cake. And the whole time, 4 inches from her hand, sat the answer to a question her mother had been whispering for a year. Sloan thought a man like me would never check. She was right that I trust her. She was wrong about why I finally opened it. Because that envelope didn't tell me whose son he was. It told me which one of us had something to hide. I'm Sebastian, 32, and I inspect houses for a living. I walk through other people's walls and find the rot they painted over. I was about to learn my own house had a crack running straight through the foundation, and that the woman handing out cake had known about it longer than I had. Let me take you back to that party, because everything I understood about my marriage came apart in a yard full of balloons. The party was in our backyard in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. 30 folding chairs borrowed from the church. A bounce house I'd pumped up myself at 7 that morning, on my knees in the wet grass, while the rest of the house slept. Owen wanted a dinosaur theme, so paper triceratops stood on sticks in every flower bed, and I'd spent 2 evenings cutting them out at the kitchen table, while Sloan took calls in the other room with the door shut. I noticed the door being shut. I want you to remember that I noticed. Owen ran up to me, holding a green balloon animal, gap-toothed, breathless. Dad, it's a T-Rex, but it looks like a dog." "That's because the T-Rex is undercover," I said. "He's in disguise, deep cover, very dangerous mission." He thought about that with his whole face. Then he laughed so hard he sat down in the grass. I'd have burned the house down for that laugh. I want that on the record too. The guests came in a slow trickle by 11. My neighbor Hank, who lends me his ladder and never remembers to take it back. 2 boys from Owen's kindergarten class with their parents. Sloane's friends from her old marketing job. Women I'd met 100 times and never once felt looked at by. And Sloane's family. Renata, her older sister, 33, still wearing her divorce like a coat she couldn't take off. And Diane, my mother-in-law, 60 next spring. Silver bob, a cardigan, even in June. She had a way of holding a glass of iced tea like it was a clipboard, and she was grading you. Diane came up the driveway, kissed Owen on the crown of his head, handed Sloan a gift bag, and then she stopped at the top of the deck steps, in the kitchen doorway, and she looked out over the yard at me kneeling in the grass with her grandson. She didn't come down. She didn't wave. She just watched. And something in her mouth tightened, and she took a slow sip of tea like she was deciding whether the house passed. I caught, over the noise, one thing she said to Renata as they stood in that doorway. She didn't know I heard it. The wind carried it the wrong way for her and the right way for me. "Look at him out there," Diane said, "playing the perfect father. For now." For now. You hear a lot of small cruelties in 5 years of marriage. You learn to file them under weather. But for now went into a different file, because for now is a thing you say about something you already know has an end date. I filed it. I kept smiling. I went and got the cake. Sloan called everyone in close for the candles. She stood behind Owen with her hands on his shoulders, and she looked up at her friends over his head. And she said it, the line I'd hear again in my sleep for months. "He has your eyes, you know." She squeezed my arm, smile for the camera. Spitting image of his daddy. The women cooed. Someone took a photo. Owen blew out 5 candles in one spitty go, and everyone clapped. And I stood there holding a paper plate with a knife on it, while, in the inside pocket of my jacket, folded in an envelope I'd carried for 3 days, sat a piece of paper that made her sentence one of the strangest things I have ever heard a person say on purpose, because she didn't believe it needed saying. That's the part I couldn't get past. Nobody who actually knows a thing announces it to a yard. You announce the thing you're building an alibi around. I smiled for the photo, I cut the cake, and I thought, she's setting a table, and I'm the only one here who's early to dinner. Before I go any further, if your chest is already tight, if you've ever loved a kid so much it scared you, take a second and hit like and subscribe, because these stories only reach the people who need them when you do. And drop your city and the time where you are in the comments. I read them. It genuinely helps to know I'm not talking to an empty room tonight. Now let me tell you how I knew the ending before anyone said a word. I need you to understand something about me before I go further because it explains everything I did and everything I refused to do. My father left when I was 7. Not a fight, not a slam door. He backed the car out of the driveway on a Tuesday to get milk, and he took his fishing rods, and he never came back. I sat on the front step until the streetlights came on. My mother told me to come inside. I told her I was waiting. I waited a long time. Years, if you count the way I mean it. So I grew up into a man who keeps his promises the way other people breathe. I show up. I don't leave. When Owen was born and his tiny hand closed around my finger in that hospital room, 3:30 in the morning, machines beeping soft, Sloan asleep. I made him a promise I have never once broken. You will always know exactly where I am. That's the whole religion I have. That's it. So when Diane started asking whether my son was really mine, she wasn't just insulting me. She was reaching into the one room in my chest I keep locked, and she was rattling the handle to see if it would open. Here's how the asking started, because it didn't start at the party. It started a year before, small, the way water starts in a wall. At first it was hair. He's got such dark hair, though, at a Sunday dinner, apropos of nothing, while she passed the potatoes. Then it was features. Funny how kids change. You were so fair as a baby, Sloan. Both of you were. A car ride, Owen strapped in the back, humming. Then one Sunday she stood at her own sink, drying a plate, water running so the words could hide inside it, and she said it clean, with a little smile, like a joke that wasn't one. Are you sure he's really yours? The plate squeaked under her towel. I looked at my wife. Sloan was looking at her phone. She didn't defend me. She didn't laugh it off. She turned a little so I couldn't see her face. And that was the first crack I couldn't paint over. I want to be fair, because fair is the only ground I've ever been able to stand on. For a while, I told myself Diane was just a difficult woman who'd never thought I was good enough. That's a common story, and I'd have believed it for the rest of my life if the story had stayed there. But it didn't stay there. It started to move with purpose. And I inspect things for a living, which means I know the difference between a stain and a leak, and I know that the tell is never the water. Bye. The tell is that someone keeps mopping exactly one spot and calling it nothing. The spring before the party, my wife started closing doors. I don't mean metaphors. I mean the actual door of the office we'd built out of the third bedroom. It used to stay open. We'd both drift in and out, pay bills, print Owen's school forms, look up recipes neither of us made. Then one week in March, it was shut when I got home and shut when I left. And Sloan started saying, "I'm on a work thing," in a voice that had a wall inside it. Then the bank statements stopped coming in the mail. I didn't go looking. I'm not a man who goes looking, but I'm a man who notices. And I noticed the mailbox went quiet. And one Sunday, I opened the banking app on the tablet to check a deposit, and it asked me to log in again, and my password didn't work. "Oh, I changed everything," Sloan said, not looking up from the counter. "There was a scam going around. I was protecting us." Protecting us. I turned that phrase over for a week like a coin I couldn't spend. Here's the thing about inspecting houses. People don't hide the big problems out in the open. They hide them behind a fresh coat of paint, a new cabinet door, a rug placed just so. And the tell is always the same. Someone bothered to cover exactly that spot, and nothing else. Sloan had covered exactly 3 things: the money, the mail, the passwords, and nothing else. I told myself I was being paranoid. That's the word that started showing up around then. Always in her mouth, always with a little laugh. "You're being paranoid, Seb." God, you're so paranoid lately. She said it in front of Renata. She said it once in front of Owen. And I watched my 5-year-old file it away, the way kids file everything. And I felt something go cold and flat in my chest, like a floor that started to slope. Because I wasn't paranoid. I've walked 10,000 basements. I know a leak. It got worse in April, and it got specific, which is when noticing turns into knowing. Sloan took a girls' weekend to Cincinnati with Renata and came back with a brightness she hadn't worn in 2 years. And a story that didn't fit its own timeline. She said they'd stayed at a hotel downtown. The photo she posted was from a neighborhood 40 minutes north, in a town called Dublin, in front of a house with a "for rent" sign half cropped out of the frame. You could still see the corner of it, a little red triangle at the edge of my wife's smile. I didn't say anything. I want you to notice that too. I didn't accuse. I didn't hold up the photo and demand. I just started paying attention the way I pay attention to a house that's about to fail. Quietly, thoroughly, without letting the sellers see me writing. There was one night, late April, that told me more than the photo did. I woke at 2 in the morning and her side of the bed was cold. Not warm, empty, the way it is when someone's in the bathroom. Cold. She'd been gone a while. I got up. I didn't turn on a light. I've walked enough dark houses to move through my own without one. And through the kitchen window, I saw her on the back porch, in her coat over her pajamas, phone to her ear, pacing the 4 steps of the deck and back the way people do when the call is long and low and not for anyone else to hear. I stood in my own kitchen in the dark, and I caught 3 pieces of it through the glass. Not the whole thing, just enough. Once it's finalized, it's cleaner if he's already settled up there before Owen even starts. I know, but if I do it too soon, it looks like I planned it. He won't. Trust me. A man like him will never see it coming. A man like him will never see it coming. I went back to bed before she came in, and I lay on my cold side of the mattress with my heart going like a hammer on a stud, and I made my face soft and my breathing slow, and when she slid back under the covers smelling like the outside, I said nothing at all. She thought I was asleep. She patted my shoulder once, absently, the way you check a lock. A man like him will never see it coming. She was half right. I didn't see all of it yet, but I'd started to. And then, in early May, at Diane's Sunday dinner, Renata slipped. She'd had 2 glasses of wine. She put her hand on Sloane's arm across the table, warm, sisterly, and she said, "It's going to be so much better for Owen up there. The school's alone." The table went still for exactly 1 second. Then Diane said brightly, "Renata, honey, help me carry the salad," and steered her by the elbow into the kitchen. Sloane laughed and said something about a hypothetical, someday, who knows. And I ate my pot roast and told Diane it was delicious, because that's what you do when you've just watched a curtain twitch, and you don't want the people behind it to know you saw. Up there, so much better for Owen. Up there. Nobody had told me we were moving. Nobody had told me my son had a new school district picked out. And my sister-in-law had said it like it was already decided, because to them, it was. That night, I lay in bed next to my wife and listened to her breathe, even and untroubled, and I understood all the way down to the slab that a plan existed, a plan with a house in it, and a school in it, and my son in it, and no room in it for me. The only question left was how far along it was. The answer came the next morning, and it came in a way I never went looking for. I want to be clear about that, because later they'd say I went digging. I didn't dig. My son spilled apple juice. That's the whole reason. Owen was in the office spinning himself dizzy in the desk chair while I made pancakes, and he knocked over his cup, and he came running out with juice down his shirt going, "Dad, I made a flood. It's a very bad flood." And I went in to clean it, and I pulled the chair back to get the wheel, and a folder had slid down behind the desk. Not hidden, just fallen. A plain manila folder, the kind I use for building permits. I picked it up to put it back. It had opened on the way down. The top page lay face up. I read it before I decided to. It was a consultation letter from a family law office in Dublin, dated 3 weeks earlier. "Dear Ms. Merrick," not Cole, Merrick. Her maiden name, like our marriage, was a typo she'd already gone in and corrected. I stood in that little room with apple juice soaking cold through the knee of my jeans, and I read the whole thing. It talked about residential relocation with the minor child. It talked about primary physical custody. It talked about establishing a pattern of the father's instability and controlling behavior to support the relocation request. Instability, controlling behavior, mine. And there, in the second paragraph, one line I have not been able to unhear since. "Regarding your concern about paternity, pursuing a test would strengthen the narrative and create additional leverage. Please advise." I read that sentence 4 times. Your concern about paternity, create leverage. Owen appeared in the doorway holding his soaked shirt over his head like a trophy. "Dad, the flood is very, very bad. We might need a boat." I set the folder down on the desk. I picked up my son. I said, "You know what, buddy? Floods are no match for us. We've got towels, and we've got a mop, and we've got each other. Floods never win against a good team." And over his shoulder, in the mirror on the closet door, I watched my own face go through something, and then go still. And I understood 3 things at once. There was no other man. There never had been. The question about whether Owen was mine had never come from doubt. It had come from a strategy. Diane planted it, Sloan watered it, and a lawyer had just recommended they harvest it. Because a husband who demands a paternity test, who obsessively questions the child, is a gift in a custody case. He looks unstable. He looks cruel. He looks exactly like the man they'd already decided to say I was. They didn't want to know if Owen was mine. They wanted me to ask. I want to tell you, I was clean and calm in that moment. I wasn't. Not all the way. There was a full minute, standing there with Owen's wet shirt in my hand, where every muscle in me wanted to walk into the kitchen, put that letter on the counter, and say, "What is this?" in the voice my father never even stayed long enough to use. I got as far as the hallway. Then I stopped, because I could see it. The whole scene, already storyboarded. Me, letter in hand, voice up, Sloan, calm, wounded, reaching for her phone. See? This is what I've been dealing with. The intensity, the paranoia. He went through my things. Every reaction I had, they'd already assigned a label to. Anger was controlling. Tears were unstable. Questions were obsessive. Going through the folder, so even though it fell, even though my son flooded the room, that was digging. So I did the only thing that had no label yet. I turned around, went back, and put the folder exactly where it had fallen. Wheel mark on the carpet lined up, corner against the baseboard, the way I leave a house looking like I was never in it. Then I made my son dry pancakes and cut them into the shape of, allegedly, a dinosaur. And I sat across from him and watched him eat. And I made a decision some of you are not going to agree with. I decided to find out the truth privately, on my own terms, and to say nothing. Not because I doubted my boy. Look at me. I have never doubted my boy for 1 second of one day of his life. But because I finally understood the game, and I understood that the only way to lose it was to walk into the part they'd written for me. If I stormed in and demanded a test, I was the jealous husband. If I confronted her, I was controlling. If I broke down, I was pathetic and unfit. So I refused to react. I got quiet. I got careful. I got exact. I ordered a home DNA kit and had it shipped to my sister's house, not mine. My sister is named Delia, 4 years older than me, a labor and delivery nurse and the person who half raised me after our father backed out of that driveway. When I showed up at her place with a cheek swab and a plastic tube in a padded envelope, she didn't ask a single stupid question. She looked at the kit. She looked at me. She said, "Whose idea was the doubt?" That's my sister. She skips the whole conversation and goes straight to the load-bearing wall. Her mother's, I said. Then Sloan's, then a lawyer's. Delia was quiet for a second. Then, Owen is the most coal-looking child I have ever caught in my 2 decades of catching babies. He does the eyebrow thing. She caught herself. The thing you do, the thing Dad did. I know, I said. So why test? Because they think the answer is a weapon, I said. And I want to know what's in the gun before somebody points it at my kid. She held my eyes for a long moment. Delia has seen a lot of the worst nights of a lot of people's lives. She doesn't spend her worry cheaply. Okay, she said finally. But Seb, listen to me. Whatever that paper says, and it's gonna say what you already know. Don't let this turn you into somebody Owen doesn't recognize. You've spent 30 years being the opposite of Dad. Don't let them talk you into the driveway. I swabbed Owen's cheek on a Saturday morning while we played a game I invented on the spot called Secret Agent Dentist. He thought it was the single funniest thing that had ever happened in the history of the world. He made me do it twice. I mailed the kit from a drop box 2 towns over on a road I don't drive for any other reason. And then I waited. And while I waited, I did something they never counted on. I started paying attention to my son like a man who might not get to keep him. I stopped being the man they thought I was in the quiet of that waiting. Not louder, not angrier, just awake. A house you've stopped trusting is a different house to live in, even when not one thing in it has moved. You walk the same hallway and you hear it differently. You start to notice which boards were always loose and which ones went loose on purpose. Those 2 weeks waiting on the envelope were the best 2 weeks I'd had with Owen in a year, and I hate that. I hate that it took a threat to make me that present. But I won't pretend it didn't happen, because pretending is what everyone else in this story did, and look how that went. I took him to the quarry lake and taught him to skip rocks. His best was one skip. Exactly one. And he screamed like he'd split the atom. I let him stay up late on a school night to watch a meteor shower that turned out to be mostly clouds. And we lay on the trampoline in the dark, and I made up the names of stars, and he believed every one. "That one's Gary," I said, pointing at a satellite crawling across the black. "Stars don't have people names." "Gary does. Gary's a rebel. Gary left the constellation to see the world." "Did Gary come back?" I looked at that little moving light for a second. "Yeah," I said. "Gary always comes back. That's the difference between Gary and a regular star." He fell asleep out there with his head on my arm, and I lay very still so I wouldn't wake him. And I looked up at Gary the rebel star, and I made a second promise to lay on top of the first one. Whatever they'd built, whatever they'd planned, I was not going to be the car backing out of the driveway. Not for anyone. Not ever. If I lost, I'd lose standing right where he could see me, so that for the rest of his life, whatever anyone told him, he'd have one memory that didn't match the story: his father staying. While I lay on that trampoline making promises to a satellite, the machine kept running. And a few days later, it opened a second front, in a place I never expected, and that's when I understood these were not people who'd stop at one lie. Owen's kindergarten had a spring family night. I went because I go to everything. The concerts where he stands in the back and forgets the words. The field days, all of it. His teacher, Ms. Petrangelo, is a kind woman in her 50s who has spent 30 years learning to read families across a low table. She pulled me aside by the cubbies. "Careful, gentle, the way you approach something you've been told to worry about. Mr. Cole, I want to check in. Owen's doing wonderfully, but his mom mentioned some, tension at home. She wanted me to keep an eye out, in case Owen seemed anxious. Around transitions. Around, pickups. Around pickups. Around me." Sloan had gone to my son's teacher and planted a flag. "Watch the father. He might be a problem. The child might not be safe in the transition." Laying groundwork with a mandated reporter. Friesui. Building a witness in a cardigan. I felt the heat come up the back of my neck, and I let it crest and I let it pass because a house inspector who yells at the cellar learns nothing. "I appreciate you telling me," I said, and I meant it. Owen's a happy kid. If you ever see anything that worries you, anything, from anyone, I want you to trust exactly what you see with your own eyes, not what any adult tells you to look for, including me. Ms. Petrangelo looked at me for a long moment. Teachers know things. She'd watched me help 6-year-olds tie their shoes at 3 field days. She gave a small nod and something in her face relaxed, and I understood she'd just quietly moved me out of one column and into another. Then Diane tried it with Owen directly, and that one I nearly couldn't hold. It was a Sunday pickup at Diane's. I came to get Owen, and he was sitting at the kitchen counter with a coloring book, and his grandmother was leaning over him, and I heard her voice, low and sweet, before they heard the door. "Now, if your mommy ever needs to take a trip, just you and her, that would be fun, wouldn't it? A big adventure you wouldn't even miss." "Owen," I said. "Hey, bud, shoes on. We've got a mission." He lit up and slid off the stool. Diane straightened, unhurried, iced tea in hand, and she gave me the grating smile. "We were just talking," she said. "I know exactly what you were doing," I said, quiet, even. I didn't raise it a single degree. That's the thing that unsettles people like Diane. A man who stays level while he tells you he sees you. "You can think whatever you want about me, Diane, but you point that at him one more time, and I will make it the most documented mistake of your life. Are we clear?" Her smile didn't move, but her eyes did, just a flicker. The flicker of someone recalculating the man she'd written off. "Owen, sweetheart, give Grandma a hug," she said, turning warm as a lamp. And he did, because he's 5, and he loves her, and I let him, because I will not be the one who teaches a boy to flinch from his own grandmother. That's her job, and she's doing it fine without my help. I buckled him in, undercover T-Rex all the way home, and I thought, they have a lawyer, a house, a school, a teacher primed, and now they're leaning on the kid himself. This isn't a woman falling out of love. This is a demolition, permitted and scheduled. Most men at this point start fighting the demolition. They call the wife's bluff. They move money. They hide the passport. They corner the kid at bedtime with questions no 5-year-old should have to hold. I understood the pull of every one of those because I'm not a saint. I'm just a man who's watched a lot of houses come down and learned which walls you can lean on and which ones fall on you if you touch them. So instead of fighting the demolition, I did the least dramatic thing a cornered man can do. I kept being ordinary, loudly, deliberately, provably ordinary. I took Owen to his own 5-year checkup because I always had and I made a point of it. Dr. Awad has known Owen since his first breath, and she knows me because I'm the parent who writes down the questions. I didn't say a word about the divorce to her. I just did what I've always done. Sat on the little chair with the paper on it, held Owen's hand for the fingerstick, told him the bad part was over before it was so he'd trust me for the next one. Ordinary. On the calendar. In the file. I kept signing the camp forms in my own handwriting. I kept the loose board on the back step exactly loose. I kept showing up at every drop-off and every pickup with a truck the whole street could set a clock by. I wasn't building a case. I was just refusing to disappear, and it turns out those look the same from the outside. But I want to be honest, because if I only tell you the calm parts, you'll think I had this figured out. I didn't. There was one night that nearly took me. Before I found Holloway, I made one earlier call. A big billboard firm, the kind with a 1-800 number. An intake person put me through to a young associate who talked fast and meant well and told me the truth as he saw it. Honestly, relocation cases are rough for dads, he said, especially when mom's been painted as the primary caregiver. Judges are cautious. If she's already got a house and a school up there and a story about your behavior, you could be looking at every other weekend. Best case. I'd start managing expectations. Every other weekend. I sat in my truck in a parking lot after that call and did the worst math of my life. And for about 2 hours, I seriously considered the stupidest idea I have ever had. I thought about just selling out, quitting my whole life here, and moving to Dublin myself, renting a place down the block from wherever she landed, becoming the sad dad in the next building, so at least I'd be near him, so at least I wouldn't be the driveway. I actually drove up there, 40 minutes north, at 9 at night, and I parked across from that house with the cropped for rent sign, and I sat there like a man casing his own funeral. Then I called Delia. I didn't even say hello. I said, I found a place up here. I could move. I could just be close. There was a long silence on the line. Then my sister said in her flat hospital voice, the one she uses when she needs you to hear her over the machines, Sebastian, go home, right now. That boy has one place in the world that never moves, and it's you. If you chase her up there and rebuild your whole life around her orbit, you don't become his dad who stayed. You become the man who follows her from a distance. You'd be the driveway with a forwarding address. I put my head against the steering wheel. Go home, she said. Fix your own step. Fight from the ground you're standing on. Don't let them scare you off it. That's the entire plan, and it almost just worked in a parking lot. I drove home, 40 minutes south, forward. I finished exactly none of the back step that night, but I sat on it until I stopped shaking. And then I went inside and stood in the doorway of my son's room until the nightlight cycled blue to green to blue, and I made myself a rule I've never broken since. I will not chase. I will not vanish. I will stay exactly where he can always find me, and I will make them come to the ground I'm standing on. The envelope arrived at Delia's on a Wednesday. My sister called and said, "It's here," in the flat voice she uses at the hospital when the news is the kind you sit down for. I drove over. I sat at her kitchen table. I did not open it. I want to tell you why, because it's the strangest part, and it's true. I already knew what it would say. I knew Owen was mine the way I know a floor joist is sound when I put my full weight on it, and it doesn't even sigh. So the paper inside couldn't tell me one new thing about my son. But it could tell me something about them. It could tell me exactly how cold the people in my house were willing to be, because if they were prepared to use my own child as a poker chip, to make a 5-year-old the leverage in a negotiation, then the woman I married was not a wife who'd stopped being happy. She was someone else entirely, wearing my wife's face, hanging my son's birthday banner, telling a yard he had my eyes. so I carried the sealed envelope for 3 days. I carried it through Owen's 5th birthday against my chest, while Diane watched me from the kitchen doorway and said for now, and Sloan told the yard he had my eyes. On the 3rd night, after the party, after Owen was asleep with dinosaur frosting still on one cheek because I couldn't bring myself to scrub that face, I sat alone in my truck in the driveway, and I opened it. Owen Cole, alleged father, Sebastian Cole. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. I sat there a long time, not because I was surprised, because I finally had the whole shape of it in my 2 hands, and it was heavier than I'd braced for. That number wasn't news about my son. It was the measurement of what they were willing to do to a child who was, without any question in the world, exactly who he had always been. That envelope didn't tell me whose son he was. It told me which one of us had something to hide, and it wasn't me. Now, here is where most men would go inside and start yelling, wave the paper, demand answers, give them the scene they'd storyboarded and cast me in months ago. I folded the results, slid them back into the envelope, and pushed the envelope up under the driver's seat of my truck, next to the tire gauge and the emergency flares. Then I went inside, checked on my sleeping son, and got into bed beside my wife. "You were sweet today," she murmured, half asleep. "He had the best time." "He did," I said, and I meant it. That part was true, and true is the only currency I had left. I lay in the dark and did the math of a man who inspects things. They had a lawyer, a plan, a house up north. A teacher warned, a grandmother whispering to the kid, and a fake doubt about my son loaded and chambered. They were going to move first, move hard, and paint me unstable before I even knew the brush was out. So I was going to do the one thing they'd never assigned me a label for. I was going to get calm, get organized, and get my own attorney, not to attack, to stand. Because you cannot corner a man who has already told you, out loud, exactly where he is and exactly where he's staying. Pause for a second before I tell you what she did next. You've seen how careful I was. The folder back in its place, the test under the seat, not one raised voice. Now think about what a person does when they've built a trap this elaborate and the mouse won't step in it. What do you think Sloan did when I calmly agreed to everything? Say it in the comments before I tell you. Most people guess she backed off. Most people are wrong. I found my lawyer the way I find good electricians. I asked the most careful person I know. Delia had walked a co-worker through a custody case the year before, and she gave me exactly one name. Marguerite Holloway, 60s, silver, a voice like a level being set down on a beam and coming up true. I sat in Holloway's office and slid the sealed envelope across the desk. My wife is planning to relocate with our son and to argue in court that I'm unstable, I said. Part of the plan is a paternity doubt they raised themselves a year ago and a lawyer told her to weaponize. This is a private DNA test I took. Owen is mine. I know it isn't admissible. I'm not here to fight dirty. I'm here to not get run over by people who've been planning this since before his last birthday. Holloway read the results. She set them down. She looked at me over her glasses for a good 5 seconds. You didn't confront her. No, you didn't move money, hide the child, drain an account, or do anything cute. No, I put the folder back where it fell. Something in her face changed. A professional going from cautious to interested. Say that again. The letter fell behind the desk. My son had spilled juice. I read it, and I put it back exactly where it landed, wheel mark and all. Holloway leaned back. Mr. Cole, do you know how rare you are? In 20-some years, I have watched good people torch their own cases in the first 10 minutes because they had to be right in the kitchen instead of right in the courtroom. She tapped the envelope. Here's the truth. You are married. Under Ohio law, a child born during your marriage makes you the presumed legal father. Automatically. You don't have to prove a thing. She does. And a parent who manufactures a paternity doubt to use as, I'm quoting your own summary, leverage. That is not a strong parent in front of a judge. That is a parent using a child as a tool, and courts have a very long memory for it. So what do? You keep doing exactly what you've been doing, which is almost nothing, she said. Don't wave this around. Don't accuse. Don't move out of the house. That's a trap they'll spring. The empty second bedroom. The he abandoned us. You stay. You parent. You keep every camp form in your handwriting and every pediatrician appointment on your calendar, and you let them make their move. People who build a machine this elaborate almost always feed themselves into it. Our whole job is to be the calmest people in the room on the day it happens. I want to be honest about the next few weeks because they were quiet on the outside and brutal on the inside. I kept going to Owen's t-ball games and cheering for a kid who ran to third base. I kept fixing the loose board on the back steps, or trying to. I couldn't seem to finish it, and I understood on some level that I was leaving it undone on purpose, because a house with one unfinished thing is a house someone still lives in. I kept my voice level at dinner while, across the table, my wife built a careful case that I was the danger in that house. And she got warmer. That's the part nobody warns you about. When someone is about to detonate your life, they often get gentle first. The way you pet a dog before the needle. She made my coffee. She touched the back of my neck when she passed my chair. She told Owen in front of me that Daddy worked so hard for us. I let her. I drank the coffee. I said thank you, because I finally understood that the warmth was a receipt she was writing herself. See how kind I was, how generous, how I always said the boy was his. So, imagine how paranoid, how unstable the husband must have been to secretly test the child anyway. Every soft thing she did in those weeks was testimony. She was building the trial. I was just early to the courtroom. And then, in the middle of all that warmth, the mail told on her. The mailbox that had gone quiet back in March coughed up one piece it wasn't supposed to. A glossy envelope, thick, official. Welcome to Dublin City Schools. Across the front, in cheerful blue, addressed to Owen Cole, sent to our house, my house, because whoever filled out the form in early May had used our current address for the paperwork and their new one for everything else, and a computer somewhere had split the difference. I stood at the end of my own driveway and opened it, because it had my son's name on it, and I am, on paper and in every other way, his father. Kindergarten was over. This was a welcome packet for first grade. Bus routes, a supply list, a little card that said we're so excited to have Owen joining our school family this fall. This fall. Not maybe. Not someday. Not the hypothetical Sloan had laughed off at Diane's table with, who knows, someday. It was done. My son had a bus route in a town 40 minutes away, and a school family that wasn't his family, and a start date, and I'd found out from a piece of junk mail addressed to a 6-year-old. I did not go inside and wave it. You know that by now. I slid it into the folder in my truck, under the seat, next to the other envelope, the sealed one. 2 envelopes now. One said my son was mine beyond any doubt. The other said my wife had already enrolled him somewhere I wasn't. I kept them together because together they told the whole truth. And I was going to need the whole truth to still be in one piece on the day everyone finally looked at it. Then I walked back inside and told my wife the mail was mostly circulars, and she said thanks, babe, and touched my neck when I passed. And I let her. There was one dinner I almost lost it. I want to tell you about it because it's the closest I came to giving them the scene they wanted. She'd made pot roast, my mother's recipe, the one she'd gotten from me years ago and only made when she wanted something. Owen was at the table telling us a long, structureless story about a kid at camp named Bryson who could allegedly do a backflip, and Sloan reached over and cut Owen's meat into small pieces. And then she looked at me across the table, warm, soft, and she said, "We're lucky, aren't we? Look at him. Look at him." I had the folded test in my shirt pocket. I'd carried it there for a day by then. I could feel the corner of the envelope against my chest, and I felt the whole thing rise up in me at once. The folder behind the desk, the lawyer's letter. A man like him will never see it coming. The porch at 2 in the morning. And for 1 second, my hand actually moved toward my pocket. I was going to put it on the table between the pot roast and the paper dinosaurs and say, "Is this what lucky looks like to you?" And then Owen said, "Dad, could you do a backflip? Bryson says grown-ups can't, but I said my dad can do anything." I looked at my son. He was waiting, fork up, completely certain. And I understood that if I put that envelope on the table, the last thing my son would remember from that kitchen was his father's face coming apart while his mother reached for her phone. That's the memory they wanted me to make. That's the whole prize. I took my hand off my pocket. "Grown-ups can't do backflips," I told him, But I can do a cartwheel that's so bad it's actually good. After dinner, outside, bring witnesses." He screamed with joy. Sloan laughed. And I ate my pot roast, and I did a genuinely terrible cartwheel in the backyard 40 minutes later, and my son laughed so hard he got the hiccups, and the envelope stayed in my pocket, and I went to bed knowing I'd just won something that would never show up in any court file. I'd stayed myself one more night. I'd stayed myself. That week, Owen asked me the question I'd been dreading, and he asked it the way kids ask the biggest things. Sideways, at bedtime, with the lights off, when your face is safely a shadow. I'd finished the second book. I was standing to go, and out of the dark, he said, "Dad, Grandma says me and Mommy might go on a big adventure, just us, somewhere with a better school." A pause, the small machinery of a 5-year-old turning something over. "But you'd come too, right? On the adventure?" There it was, the coaching, coming back out of my son's mouth in his own soft voice at 9 at night, in dinosaur pajamas. I want you to understand what I felt in that half second, because it's the whole wound. My father backed out of a driveway when I was 7 and made me the boy waiting on the step. And here was a plan to make my son the boy in the car, driven away from his own father, told it was an adventure, taught to think the empty seat was normal. 2 generations of the same cruelty, just pointed a different direction. I sat back down on the edge of his bed. I did not lie to him. I've never lied to him, and I wasn't going to start with this. "Here's what I know for sure," I said. "I don't know everything grown-ups are figuring out right now. Some of it's complicated, and it's not your job to carry it. But I know one thing all the way, and you can hold on to it no matter what anybody says. Wherever you are, this house, another house, a school here, a school anywhere, your dad will always, always know exactly where you are, and he will always be close enough to get to you. You will never have to wait on a step wondering if I'm coming. Not one time in your whole life. That's a promise, and I don't break my promises." "Do I?" "No," he said. "Certain, like it was the most obvious fact in the world, like gravity. You never break promises. You even came back that time you forgot the ice cream." "I even came back for the ice cream," I agreed. He was quiet a moment. Then he wormed one hand out of the covers and gripped my finger, the way he has since before he could talk, and he said, "Okay," and rolled over, and was asleep in under a minute, the whole enormous question set down and handed to me to carry, which is exactly the deal, which is exactly the job. I sat there in the dark, holding my son's finger long after he'd let go of mine, and I made the promise real in my own chest, where it counts. Nobody drives this boy away from a father who stays. Not his grandmother, not a lawyer, not his own mother. They'd have to come through the ground I was standing on, and I was done being scared off it. Sloan made her move in the last week of June. She did it on a Tuesday, of course. Tuesdays are for leaving. She waited until Owen was at day camp, and she sat me down at our own kitchen table, and she'd rehearsed, because her eyes were already wet before she said a word. "Seb, we both know this hasn't been working." "Do we?" I said. Not a question. She didn't like that. It didn't fit the script. "I've filed for divorce." She said it fast, then softer. "And I'm asking for primary custody. I'm moving to Dublin. The schools, Seb, they're the best in the state. You know they are. I want what's best for Owen. That's all I've ever wanted." Dublin, the town from the cropped for rent sign. The district Renata had toasted a month before it was supposedly even a thought. "You've thought about this for a while," I said. "For a while." She reached across the table for my hand. I let her take it because I wanted to see how far she'd go. "I need you to not make this ugly. For him. You've been, Seb, you've been so intense lately. So watchful. The paranoia. It scares me a little, honestly. And I think a clean break with me and Owen up north and you having your weekends is the healthiest thing." There it was. The paint going up on the wall in real time. Intense. Watchful. Paranoia. Every word a brick. And I was the one they were building the wall around, while I sat in my own kitchen and held her hand and let her. "And there's one more thing," she said, softer still. She saved it for last, the way you deliver a blade slow so it hurts on the way in. "My mom's always wondered, and after how you've been acting, the secrecy, the intensity, I think, for everyone's peace of mind, we should just do a real test, a court-ordered paternity test, so there's never any question. So you can never say later that anyone hid anything from you." She squeezed my hand, sympathetic, reasonable, fully on the record. She thought she was closing the trap. She had just handed me the key to it. Because here is what my wife did not know. She didn't know I'd already tested. She didn't know I'd already read her own lawyer's letter recommending she use that exact test as leverage. She didn't know that the second she asked a court to formally examine my son's paternity, she would be dragging the entire manufactured doubt onto the official record, under oath, in writing, where a calm attorney could ask a simple question about when it started and who started it and why. I looked at my wife, across the table where I'd cut out paper dinosaurs 2 nights before our son's 5th birthday. I said, "Okay." Her eyebrows moved up a single millimeter. She'd braced for a war. She'd gotten a man agreeing, mildly, to the very test she'd built to destroy him. "Okay," she said. "If a court test gives everyone peace of mind," I said, "let's do it. I've got nothing to hide. I've never had one single doubt about who Owen is. So, sure. Let's put it on the record." I want to tell you, I felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt like a man standing in a house he used to love, watching it fail every point of an inspection whose results he'd already read. There is no win in that. There's just the truth, finally out of the walls and into the light, where you can't unsee it. But for the first time in 4 months, I wasn't afraid. That feeling lasted about 40 hours, because 2 days later, Holloway called, and her level voice had a crack running through it I hadn't heard before. "They amended the filing," she said. "Cole, I need you to sit down and hear this whole thing before you react. Can you do that for me?" I sat down on the loose back step I still hadn't finished fixing. "Go." "They're not just asking for relocation and primary custody anymore. Your wife submitted a sworn affidavit. It states that you secretly obtained a DNA test on Owen months ago without her knowledge or consent. That you've been, I'm quoting, obsessively fixated on the child's paternity. That she recently discovered evidence of a home test kit. They're framing the court test as her reasonable attempt to, quote, reassure a fixated and deteriorating father." The yard went very quiet. Even the birds, it felt like. "How?" I said. My mouth had gone to sand. "How do they know about the—" "A shipping confirmation, most likely, or Delia's recycling, or a card statement with a lab's name on it that you never saw because you don't get the statements anymore. It doesn't matter how. What matters is they've turned it inside out. The private test you took to keep your footing, they've made it the centerpiece. They're not hiding from the paternity question anymore, Sebastian. They're standing on it. They're saying the doubt was always yours, that you're the man who couldn't believe his own son was his." I stood up off the step. I don't remember deciding to. My knees just did it. They'd taken the one thing I did in the dark to protect myself and turned it into the exact story they'd been drafting from the start. The obsessive husband, the paranoid father, the man too unwell to be trusted alone with a child. "So the test I took to protect myself is now the strongest thing in their case that you're a danger," Holloway said, quiet. "Yes, I'm sorry. I've seen them flip a lot of things, but this is clean, it's ugly, and it's clean." I hung up. I sat back down on that broken step, and for the first time since the driveway, since I was 7 years old, waiting on headlights that never came, I put my face in my hands. They'd done it. They'd taken my caution and rewritten it as a crime. They'd taken my love because that's all the test ever was, a love so afraid of being erased that it needed, once, to hold the proof in its hand, and made it Exhibit A that I was the problem, that I was unfit, that my son would be safer 3 counties away from me. I thought about Owen's hand closing around my finger in that hospital room at 3:30 in the morning. I thought about a car backing out of a driveway, and, for one long, terrible minute, I believed I was going to lose my son to the very people who'd made him a bargaining chip, and that every careful, quiet, decent thing I'd done had only dug the hole deeper, that the harder I stood still, the more it looked like I was the one who'd fallen. I'd lost. That's what it felt like on that step. I'd played it clean and quiet and careful, and I'd lost anyway. Or had I? I sat on that broken step until the streetlights came on, same as when I was 7, same slope of the same kind of evening. But I want to tell you what was different this time, because it is the whole story, the load-bearing wall of all of it. When I was 7, I sat on a step and waited for someone to come back. At 32, I stood up off the step and went inside to make my son dinner, because I was the someone now. I was the one who comes back. I was the one who never left in the first place. And a man who stays does not get to sit on the step feeling sorry for himself while his kid's macaroni goes cold. That's the difference between me and the ghost. He stayed sitting on the edge of the bed. I got up. I called Holloway back at 9 that night, after Owen was down. "Tell me what's real," I said, "and what's just noise designed to scare me?" "Good question. That's the right question." I heard her settle in. "Real, you are the presumed legal father, and nothing in this filing changes that. That's bedrock. Real, your son currently lives full-time with both of you, and you are, by any measure, a hands-on parent. The camp forms in your handwriting, the pediatrician who greets you by name, the teacher, the neighbors, the truck, everyone on the street knows. Real, relocation 3 counties away requires a judge to agree it serves the child over the objection of a fit, involved father. That is a high wall for them, not a low one. Oh. And the affidavit? The obsessed father story? Noise, she said. Dangerous noise, but noise. It's a narrative. And narratives break on exactly one thing. What? Their own words, Holloway said. People who lie to a court about why they did something almost never keep their story straight, because a lie has to be maintained, and the truth just sits there. You told me the mother has been telling the whole family, for about a year, that the boy might not be yours. Now she has sworn, in writing, that she never doubted it, that the doubt was always yours. Sebastian. Those 2 statements cannot both be true. One of them is perjury. In mediation, we do not attack. We do not raise our voices. We ask small, simple, quiet questions, and we let 2 lies find each other in the same room. Can you sit still while that happens? Can you stay calm with these people for a few hours, no matter what gets said about you? I looked through the doorway at Owen, asleep, dinosaur pajamas, mouth open, 1 foot kicked out of the covers, the way he's slept since he was a baby. I've been calm for 4 months, I said. I can do a few more hours. The mediation was set for the first week of July, in a conference room downtown, with a long table and a window that looked out on a parking garage. That was the arena, not a wedding, not a graduation, not a backyard full of balloons and paper dinosaurs, a gray room, bad carpet, a box of tissues placed dead center on the table like a dare. The night before, Delia came over after her shift, still in scrubs, and sat with me at the kitchen table until midnight. She didn't give me a pep talk. My sister doesn't do those. She made tea and she said one thing. Tomorrow they're going to say things about you that aren't true. And the whole point is to get you to become them for 1 second. Loud, ugly, cornered, so they can point and say there, that's him. Don't give them the second. You've been giving Owen 32 years of proof of who you are. Don't set it on fire to win 1 argument. She squeezed my hand. Just be his dad in that room. That's all you have to do. Be exactly who you've always been, and let them be exactly who they've always been, and let the grown-ups with the legal pads notice the difference. The morning of, I dropped Owen at camp like it was any Tuesday, because for him it was. He unbuckled himself, proud of it, and before he ran for the picnic tables, he grabbed my finger through the truck window, that same grip, and said, "Undercover T-Rex after camp?" I told him yes. Always yes. I watched him run until a counselor waved, and then I sat in the parking lot for a second with both hands on the wheel. Then I drove downtown. Both envelopes rode under the seat where they'd lived for weeks. The sealed one that said my son was mine. The glossy one that said she'd already moved him on paper. I didn't take them in. Holloway had been clear, we don't need to waive anything. But I wanted them in the truck. I wanted the whole truth parked in the lot below that gray window. Close, patient, in one piece. The way I try to keep everything that matters. I fed the meter for 3 hours. I gave myself 3 hours to stay exactly who I am. It took less. Present in that room, me and Holloway on one side, Sloan and her attorney on the other, Diane and Renata in a row of chairs against the wall, because Sloan wanted her mother there for support, and because, I understood later, Diane could not physically stand to miss the moment she'd been rehearsing for a year. A mediator sat at the head of the table. Her name was Ms. Fairfax. Neutral, unhurried, reading glasses on a chain, a legal pad squared to the table edge, and a folder in front of her that already held the court paternity report because the test had come back and both sides had the number. You already know the number. Owen was mine. 99.99. Fairfax invited opening remarks, and Sloane went first. She'd prepared this. You can always tell the prepared ones, because the tremble arrives a beat before the sentence that needs it. "I've spent a long time trying to hold this family together," she said, tissue already in hand, untouched, a prop waiting for its cue. "But the last few months, Sebastian's changed. He's watchful, intense. He goes quiet in a way that scares me. And then I found out he'd secretly tested our son, behind my back, because he'd gotten it into his head to question whether Owen was even his." She let a tear go right on schedule. "I always told that little boy he had his daddy's eyes. I don't know when that stopped being enough for him. I just want Owen somewhere calm, somewhere safe. I'm scared of what this is doing to him." Then she looked at me, straight across the tissues, and she said, soft, for the record, for the mediator's pad, for the file, "I'm a little scared of you, Seb. I'm sorry, but I am. I want to tell you what that did to my body, because the face stayed still. I'd practiced the face for 4 months, but the body doesn't take instructions the way the face does. My jaw locked so hard I heard it in my own ears. Something high and thin started ringing. I felt my nails find the pads of my palm under the table. 4 small points of contact, and I pressed into them, slow, and I made myself take one long breath through my nose, the kind you take before you put your weight on a joist you're not sure about. Because here's the cruelty of it, the real blade under the tears. She wasn't just lying. She'd taken the truest thing about me, that I show up, that I stay, that I watch over what's mine, and she'd held it up to the light and called it menace. Watchful, intense, scared of you. She'd taken a father who couldn't stop looking at his own son and dressed him up as a threat to that son. That's not an argument. That's an amputation. She was trying to cut the best part of me off and hand it to a court as evidence of the worst. I said nothing. Holloway had told me, not one word until it's yours to say. So I sat there and I bled quietly where no one could see it, and I let her finish. Sloane's lawyer opened, and he was smooth. He talked about relocation, about opportunity, about the primary bond between a mother and a young child, about minimizing disruption, and then he pivoted, right on schedule, to me. We'd also like the record to reflect our serious concerns about the father's conduct. Mr. Cole secretly subjected a 4-year-old child to a covert DNA test, without the mother's knowledge, without her consent, driven by a documented, ongoing fixation on the boy's paternity. We believe this pattern speaks to instability and a controlling temperament that makes the mother's relocation and primary custody not just reasonable, but necessary for the child's. "May I ask one clarifying question?" Holloway said, mild as milk left on a counter. Fairfax nodded. Holloway didn't so much as glance at the lawyer. She looked at my wife. "Mrs. Cole, when did you personally first come to believe there was any question about Owen's paternity?" Sloane blinked. She'd been coached for cross-examination on my behavior, not on hers. "I never did. I always knew Owen was Sebastian's. That was never in question for me. That's the whole point. Sebastian was the one who couldn't accept it. So to be clear for the record, you, personally, never held any doubt. Not for a moment." "No, never. I told everyone he had his father's eyes." A little catch in her voice, well placed. "I was proud of it." Holloway wrote one word on her pad. 1. Then she turned, unhurried, to the row of chairs against the wall. "Mrs. Merrick," to Diane, "you're Owen's grandmother. In the past year or so, did you ever raise the question of the boy's paternity? At a family dinner, say, in conversation. And here is where I learned the one thing about people who build traps that I will carry the rest of my life. They cannot resist admiring their own work." Diane sat up straighter. She'd waited a year to matter in a room like this one, and she was not about to sit against the wall and be quiet in it. She gave me the grating smile, the iced tea smile, one last time. "Someone in this family had to be a realist," she said. "I only ever said what everyone was thinking. That boy looks nothing like Sebastian, and Sebastian's people, well, his own father walked right out the door and never looked back. Some things run in the blood, and I was not going to watch my daughter and my grandson chained to a man who was never going to be enough for either one of them. So, yes, I said it. For a year, if that's what you're counting, because it needed saying, and no one else had the spine. The room went very, very still. Holloway didn't pounce. She didn't have to. She let the silence do a slow lap around the table. So you did raise it, she said gently. You, personally, for approximately a year. I raised it because it needed raising. A year before Mr. Cole ever ordered any test at all. Long before. He wasn't even suspicious until I put it in his... Diane stopped. But you cannot unring a bell, and you cannot unsay until I put it in his head. She had just told a room with a mediator and 2 attorneys in it that she was the origin of the very doubt they had sworn, under oath, belonged to me, a full year before I ever touched a swab. I did not move. I did not smile. I did not let one muscle in my face give her the reaction she'd been hunting for a year. Holloway had told me, let the 2 lies find each other. So I sat there and I watched them find each other in the middle of that gray table next to the box of tissues. Fairfax, the mediator, set down her pen. She looked at the affidavit in her folder. She looked at Diane. She looked for a long moment at my wife. Mrs. Cole, she said slowly, and her voice had changed. The neutrality still there, but a floor of iron under it now. Your sworn affidavit states that the paternity concern originated with the father, and that you never questioned it. Your mother has just stated in this room that she raised the question herself, repeatedly, at family gatherings, for approximately a year, before any test existed. I need you to help me understand which of those 2 accounts is accurate, because one of them was made under oath, and I am obligated to note the discrepancy in my report to the court. Sloane's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She looked at her lawyer. Her lawyer was looking at his own legal pad like it had personally betrayed him. And Renata, who'd had 2 glasses of wine that afternoon in May and toasted a move that wasn't supposed to exist yet, Renata said into the dead silence, in a voice that barely made it across the table. Mom, stop. Please, God, just stop. Then to the mediator, not much louder, but everyone heard it. It wasn't his idea. None of it was his idea. He didn't even know until he didn't know. They planned the whole thing. The house, the school, all of it. Before any of this started, I sat there. I know. That was the wave that brought the wall down. Not a document slammed on the table. Not a secret envelope produced like a magic trick. A sister who could not sit against the wall of a gray room and watch her own family swear a lie about a man who cut paper dinosaurs at midnight for a boy who is, without any question, exactly who he's always been. But the wall coming down wasn't the end of it. Because once one lie cracks in a room like that, the mediator stops taking anyone's word for the shape of the house. She starts checking the beams herself. Fairfax turned a page in her folder, slow, deliberate. When she spoke again, her voice had gone very even, the way a level goes still right before it tells you the floor was never flat. Let's set the paternity question aside for a moment, she said, since it appears to have originated exactly opposite to how it was sworn. I want to understand the timeline of the proposed relocation because it bears directly on the child's best interest. She looked at Sloane's attorney. The filing represents this move as a response to the breakdown of the marriage, that the relationship ended, and the mother then sought a fresh start with better schools. Do I have that right? Yes, that's the sequence, the lawyer said, but he said it the way you test a stare you already suspect is rotten. Then help me with the dates. Fairfax slid a single sheet from her folder. Because attached to the relocation request is a residential lease for the Dublin property. It's signed and dated the second week of April, and there's a school pre-enrollment form for the minor child, submitted in early May. She set the sheet down. The petition for divorce was filed in late June. The affidavit describes a marriage that had not been working and a decision made in the child's interest, but the housing and the school were secured 2 months before the marriage was ever declared over, and as far as the father's account goes, 2 months before he was told anything at all. The room did that thing again, that total stillness, except this time it had a different quality. The first silence had been shock. This one was arithmetic. Everyone in that room was doing the same subtraction at the same time. April, May, June. She'd leased the house before she told me anything. She'd registered my son at another school, 40 minutes away, while I was cutting out paper dinosaurs for a birthday party. The breakdown hadn't led to the exit. The exit had been built first, and the breakdown was scheduled around it. Performed on a Tuesday at our kitchen table with practice tears, 2 months after the moving truck already had a destination. That's not... There were deposits. We had to hold the property, Sloane started, and even she could hear how it sounded, the words getting smaller as they came out. You held a property and enrolled a child and moved his life 3 counties away on paper, Fairfax said, not unkindly, which was somehow worse than if she'd been sharp, before his father knew the marriage was ending, and then the record was framed to suggest it happened the other way around. And Diane, God help her, Diane could not stop being the architect even as the building came down around her. Of course we secured it early, she said, chin up. You don't wait until everything's a mess to protect a child. We were being responsible. Any good mother would have had it all arranged before that man had a chance to dig his heels in and make it impossible. Mom, Renata's voice wet now, you're doing it again. You're doing the exact thing. Right now. In front of them. Sloane's attorney put a hand flat on the table. The universal lawyer signal for please everyone. Stop helping. Too late. His client's own mother had just told a court-appointed mediator that the entire relocation was arranged in secret, on purpose, before the father could object, and had called it good mothering. I watched my wife's face in that moment, and I'll be honest with you, because I've been honest this whole time. It did not feel like winning. It felt like watching a load-bearing wall you'd lived inside for years finally show you it had been hollow the whole time. There's no triumph in that. There's just the cold, clean daylight of the truth coming in through a crack that can't be painted over anymore. Sloane looked at me across that gray table, not at her lawyer, not at her mother, at me. And for 1 second the performance dropped entirely off her face, and what was under it wasn't a villain twirling anything. It was a woman who had let her mother write her life, who had built a beautiful, careful exit and forgotten to check whether the man she was climbing over had ever done a single thing to deserve it. She looked, for that 1 second, genuinely lost. Then she looked away, and the second was gone, and I understood I would probably never see it again. I have thought a great deal about Renata since, about what it costs to be the one person in a room who will not hold the lie up any longer. Even when that lie is the beam holding up your whole family. She had nothing to gain by opening her mouth, and a mother, a sister, and every Sunday table for the rest of her life to lose. She opened it anyway. Most people never get the nerve and the moment on the same afternoon. She got both, and she spent them on a man who wasn't even her blood. Here is what did not happen next, and I need you to hear it, because it is the exact opposite of everything they had scripted for me. I did not stand up and read my secret number out loud. I did not slide the envelope from under my truck seat across that table like a gambler with a hidden ace. I never needed to. The court's own test was already sitting in Fairfax's folder, confirming the one thing I had never doubted for a single second. And the 2 lies were already lying there in the middle of the table, tangled together in front of everyone whose job it was to see. Sloane started to cry. Real tears, I think, though I've stopped trusting my read on her. She said she'd been overwhelmed. She said her mother had gotten in her head. She said she'd never meant for it to go this far, that she just wanted a fresh start, that Dublin had always really been about the schools. I let her finish, every word. Then I said the only thing I said in that entire meeting. I have never once wondered whether Owen is mine. My voice didn't shake. I'd used all the shaking up months ago on a hallway floor outside a nightlight, where no one had to see it. There was nothing left in me now but level. I took a test because your family turned my son into a bargaining chip, and I wanted to know how far you were willing to go before you did it to his face. Now I know. I turned once to Diane. Cardigan, iced tea gone warm and untouched in front of her. You said some things run in the blood. You're right about that. Showing up runs in mine. I have never left that boy alone in a room in his life, and I am not going to start now so that you can have a cleaner story to tell your friends. Then I turned back to the mediator, because she was the only person left in that room I still owed anything, and what I owed her was calm. I don't want this ugly, I said. I want my son to keep both his parents. He loves his mom, and I will never be the man who teaches him to stop. But he keeps me all the way. Not a weekend. Not a visitor with a different driveway. All the way. That's the only thing I came here for. A man like me would never check, she'd decided, hanging that banner. A man like him will never see it coming. She'd promised the phone on the porch at 2 in the morning. They'd built the entire house on the same bet, that the quiet ones don't look. But quiet was never the same as blind. I'd been looking the whole time. I just never once had to look away from my son to do it. Fairfax wrote for a long time. If you have ever had to sit still and let the truth do the work your rage was begging to do, if you've ever won something by staying exactly who you are instead of becoming what they needed you to be, I'd like to hear about it. Not to brag, just so the next person scrolling past at midnight, sitting on their own version of a broken step, knows it can be done. Tell them they're listening tonight, same as you. The custody arrangement took 2 more sessions and a great deal of Holloway's careful, quiet language, but the shape of it never changed after that gray room. Sloan withdrew the relocation request. You cannot move a child 3 counties from a father the court now sees as the stable present parent, especially not after your own sworn affidavit split open on the table and your own mother supplied the crowbar. We share legal custody. Owen lives primarily with me, in the house with the back steps I finally finished fixing the week the papers were signed, in the same school, with the same friends, down the street from the same neighbors who know my truck. Sloan has him every other weekend and one night in the middle of the week, and I have never once made a handoff hard because he loves his mother, and a boy should get to love his mother, and I refuse to be the kind of man who uses a child to settle a score. I had a whole childhood of watching what that costs. Diane is not welcome in my home. That is the one hard line I drew, and it is the one I will never move. A woman who spent a year telling a family that a 5-year-old might not deserve his own father does not get to sit at my table holding iced tea like a clipboard, grading the house. If Owen wants a relationship with her someday, that is a bridge he can choose to build as a grown man on his own terms, with both eyes open. It will not be built on mine, and it will not be built out of my silence. Renata calls sometimes, just to check on Owen. The first time she started to apologize, and I stopped her before she could get going. You told the truth in the one room where it cost you your whole family to tell it, I said. That is the entire apology. There's nothing else you owe me. We're good. She cried a little on the phone. I think she'd been waiting a long time for somebody in that family to tell her she'd done something right. And Sloan and I are, at last, honest strangers, which is more than we were as a married couple. She got her fresh start. She moved to Dublin alone, into a smaller version of the house with the cropped-out sign. Every other Friday, she pulls into my driveway to pick Owen up, and sometimes when he runs at her full speed across the lawn and she catches him and spins him, I see a flicker of the woman I married, the one from before her mother finished her sentences for her. I hope she finds whatever she went looking for up north. I hope for his sake she finds it soon. But I stopped needing her to be sorry a long time ago. Sorry was never really on the table. Truth had to be enough. It turned out truth was plenty. People who know the whole story ask me if I regret taking that first test. The secret one. The one that got twisted and inside out and nearly buried me alive. I don't. Not because it won anything. It didn't. The court's own test and Diane's own mouth did that. I don't regret it because of what it actually was. Underneath the strategy and the lawyers and the gray carpet, it was a father so afraid of being erased that he needed, one time in the dark of a truck cab, to hold in his hand the proof of the one thing he already knew all the way down in his bones. Owen is mine. He was always mine. Not because of a number on a page, because I was there at 3:30 in the morning when his hand closed around my finger, and I have been there every single morning since. And I will be there for every single one that is coming, until I am too old to lift him, and then a while after that. Last week, he lost his first tooth. He came sprinting out to the truck, where I was loading my inspection gear, holding it up in his open palm like a diamond he'd mined himself, gap-toothed all over again, exactly the way he was at that birthday party a lifetime ago. Dad, it fell out during snack, right into my applesauce. Can I sleep at your house tonight? I want the tooth fairy to come to your house. She knows this one better. My house. He said it like it was the obvious one, the safe one, the one you leave a tooth at when you want to be sure of the outcome. Yeah, buddy, I said, and I had to look down at that little tooth in his palm for a second so he wouldn't catch my face doing something. The tooth fairy always knows exactly where I am. She never once had to guess. He climbed up into his seat and buckled himself in, proud of that too, and he gripped my finger the way he's gripped it his whole life. Before he could walk, before he could talk, before anyone in the world tried to teach him to doubt it. And he said, "Undercover T-Rex?" It's what he calls our drive home now. Some private joke that outlived the party it was born at. "Undercover T-Rex," I said, and I backed the truck down the driveway, and I pulled out onto the road, and I drove us home. Forward, not backward. I sat on a front step once when I was 7 years old, waiting for a man to come back who never did. 30 years later, I'm the man who never once left the step. That's the whole religion I have. That's it. And it turned out to be more than enough.